Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm Chris Rebelo. I'm the Senior Director of Communications here at the Buck Institute. I am extremely pleased to welcome you to the 12th and final event of our first community seminar series. Today, we talk. Thank you. Today, we talk about the future of medicine with Dr. Lee Hood. Believe me, he is the guy that's making it happen. So, before I introduce Lee, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. If you haven't already done it, please put your phone on silent. And also, the fire marshal always likes it when I point out the emergency exits at the back of the auditorium. So, my question, anybody here new to the Buck? All right, it's always great to have new folks. Instead of me going on and on about how wonderful our science is, we have a short video that features the people who are actually making it happen. Joran?
The Buck Institute is interested in understanding aging, not only to make us live longer, but to actually alleviate and suppress the development of diseases.
Chronic disease is the great health challenge of our time. Aging is the main driver of chronic disease. To eliminate chronic disease, we must harness the biology of aging so we can live healthy longer. The Buck Institute is the world's first research organization dedicated solely to the biology of aging. We work with the building blocks of biology to understand how we age.
The Buck is concentrating on really trying to go to the root of the problem, so understanding that we can sort of intervene really early.
The Buck Institute is probably the best place in the world to be working on aging because there's so many different aspects of aging that are being studied. It's key because no one lab can do it all.
Our scientific explorers are brilliant, curious, and committed.
The idea that you could actually develop drugs that slow down the aging process was really something that 20 or 30 years ago people thought this cannot be done. Not only can it be done, but we will do it.
The pieces are in place. And we are in a unique position to put them together. Our world is defined by paradigm shifts, created by scientific discoveries. The biology of aging is the next frontier.
We're working toward a world where healthcare is better. It's a world where if we can eradicate the aging component to disease, we're all going to live healthier and longer.
It's just an incredible vision that really will, surpass anything else that we've ever seen before.
We are inviting you to a future of aging without illness. It's happening today, and it's happening here. Join us.
Okay, so before I introduce Lee, I want to thank our sponsors. They're listed in your program. Without them, this wouldn't be happening. I also want to make sure you all have note cards for Q&A if you have a question. If you do, raise your hand. A volunteer will pick them up. I already have 2 cards already, so thanks to those early birds. Let us know if you need additional cards. And I always like to look at the camera. Special welcome to those of you who are joining us on Zoom. You too can ask a question, pose it in the Q&A section on Zoom, and somebody will get that question up to me on the stage. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lee Hood. You can read about his educational background in your program, but let me say this, without a doubt, He is the most accomplished scientist who has ever walked through our doors. Lee is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, and the National Academy of Medicine. Get this, there are 6,000 people who belong to one or more of those organizations. Lee is one of just 20 people who belong to all three. So he is the CEO of Phenome Health, which has become a strategic partner here at the Buck. He is our Chief Innovation Officer, and he also is co-director of the Buck Center for Human Healthspan. Lee, come on up. Okay, so before we get going, I need to let you know, Lee is both a PhD and an MD, so he's a doctor, but he's not your doctor. And he's not licensed to give second or third opinions. So we really welcome your questions. Just please make sure they are of general interest. And also, can everybody hear me okay? All right. If there's issues with sound at some point, raise your hand and we'll get somebody to boost the volume for you. So, Lee, data-driven health. We're going to talk about that today. I want to tell you that nobody needs to take notes today. You're going to get an email with a link to today's event. If you like what we're talking about, Lee's got a book, The Age of Scientific Wellness, so you can take a really deep dive into the things that we're going to be talking about today. So, Lee.
Actually, can
yes.
you stay on that for a
Yes,
second?
you bet.
Okay. I'll say next slide.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. If we can go back to the... So I want to make a general point that I think is really critical, and that is health is the most important thing each of us as individuals can experience. It really determines how you develop your education, your jobs, your creativity, your productivity, and your longevity. And it's important from a personal point of view of letting you realize the potential you have. And it's really important from a social point of view because we want to keep the wisdom of the older functional into the 90s or more, a point we'll make. So that's point number one. Point number two is this entity you've heard called Phenome Health is really pushing the idea of scientific wellness, which is really just another approach to data-driven health. And on the next slide, we show you what data-driven health is all about. Your genome, the DNA in each and every one of your cells, specifies for you your potential of development, okay? Your phenome, which is the phenotype that you exhibit as you go from birth to death, is determined by two important things. One is your behavior, and we're going to return to that because your behavior is really critical. The second is your environment. And we can assess both of those things by looking at molecules in your blood, by looking at digital health for brain and body, by looking at your gut microbiome in a whole variety of different ways. And these measurements are called your phenome. So we want to analyze your genome, which gives you potential, and your phenome, which specifies how you use that potential, okay? And we're going to really emphasize the phenome because of the order of 90% of what you are comes from your phenome and not your genome, an amazing fact. And on the next slide, if we could have that, we did, starting about 10 years ago, a study for 4 years of 5,000 people analyzing their genomes and their phenomes. And we were able to deduce a whole series of major facts about how you optimize wellness. And let me say something about data-driven health. It really does three important things for you. One, it allows you to take what you have and optimize your wellness or your healthy aging. And I say, as I'll show you later, the two are intertwined absolutely. Number two, it gives you the potential to correct errors your genome has or errors your phenome has given you. And that second potential lets us deal with most chronic diseases effectively. And the third thing it can do is we have now two powerful methods, and I'll only talk about one of those, where we can avoid chronic diseases by using genome and phenome data and analysis. So what have we learned from the study of 5,000 individuals? Well, the first thing we learned is your genome is an absolutely goldmine of actionable possibilities you can use to facilitate your health. And I would conservatively say there are perhaps 15,000 of those that are embedded there. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One, the National Association of American Genetics said there are 82 gene variants that we can actually do something about. And collectively, in large populations, 3 to 4% of the people exhibit one of those events. So it's infrequent, but it's not rare, and it could be you. And an example of one is malignant hypothermia. This is a variant which, if you have and you use the wrong kind of anesthetic, it will activate your thermal mechanism and it will absolutely burn you up and it kills you. Simply knowing that you have that gene, you can avoid those anesthetics and you can avoid dying. And there are 80 other examples of things that would be good to know.
So Lee,
and we all want to avoid dying.
So when we were preparing for this, you told me about a personal example yourself, right? What have you found out about your genome?
So I found a lot of things about my genome, but one of the ones that was most interesting was one that came up from looking at my behavior in the statistics of this population of 5,000. And we looked, one, at my phenome and discovered that I had an unbelievably low level of vitamin D. And I started taking 1,000 international units every day, and it didn't even move it. Then we discovered in my genome that I had two variants, each of which blocked the uptake of vitamin D. And the only way I could deal with that was to use not 1,000 units, but 15,000 units to bring me to normal, and then 5,000 to maintain me at normal. So this was a beautiful example of a defect my genome has that you can completely deal with. And you want to be able to deal with the defects you obviously have. A third area that came out of these things were metrics that allowed us to measure important aspects of your biology. And one of these was biological age. And we could actually determine the age your body says you are as opposed to the age your birthday says you are, and determine how much lower the biological age is from the chronologic age. The lower it is, the better you're aging. And what was interesting about these studies, in this wellness study, we were able to show for women, for example, they lost 1.8 years of biologic age for every year they stayed in the wellness program. And that's a remarkable, and men did 0.8 years, and that probably had to do with compliance, quite frankly. But anyway, but this biological age gives you tools by which you can optimize it. It lets you look at major organs. When you get sick, your biological age goes up enormously, and it comes back down when you're well. And so there are just many things. And an index we're looking on now that is really terrific for older people is a frailty index that's utterly independent of age. You, as you get older, want to know as you become more frail, because that makes you susceptible to falls and broken bones, and one of the most common ways older people die. And we can, by doing the frailty index, there are things you can do to overcome, again, the deficiency. And then we'll talk about transitions in the next slide. And then we're going to talk about this whole interesting idea that scientific wellness is one side of the coin of healthy aging, and geroscience is the other. And in the partnership we have with the Buck here, Phenome Health and the Buck, we've actually brought those two together in a way that lets us do powerful new things that have never been possible before. We'll show you that. You get to see that on the last slide before I stop, if we get that far. Okay.
Okay, next slide.
Well, one more thing. I just wanted to say from here, there are three systems each of us have where we want to optimize wellness. Your brain, which essentially is ignored in health today, in physicians. Your body and your gut microbiome, they're intimately interconnected. They all work together in fantastic ways, and the health of one specifies the health of the other. So all three of them are important to generate. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you a really important point on
Before we get to the next slide, I'm going to stop you this time. We got a question that's related.
Okay.
So, how does one get their genome and phenome tested? So, what's available to the general public today that they might get some of that valuable information that you've been talking about?
So, if you get your genome done, there are really two problems. One, how do you get it sequenced? And two, how do you interpret it, and what does it mean for you? So on the how you get it sequenced, it's a relatively straightforward way. And without going into details, if you write to the Buck, I'll give a little prescription about how you can go out and get it done anywhere between $300 or $400 and $1,000. If you take $1,000, it'll give you an interpretation too. Okay, so that's a very straightforward thing to do, but it's always nice to be able to talk with somebody who knows a little bit about the genome and can explain these 8 different categories of actionable possibilities. And that's something, again, we're going to be writing up in some detail. And in fact, what we're doing now is we're beginning to train a chatbot so it will be able to handle all of the actionable possibilities of the genome. And one, you can ask it, tell me about it. And then two, you can say, well, I have this, what do I do? And we hope the chatbot will serve as a coach for the millions of people that are going to be doing this. And I'm predicting in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll have millions of people doing genomes and phenomes, and we'll come to later why I say that. Okay?
Okay, data-driven.
So this is, I'm going to go through a series of clicks here to show you in the first 4 clicks what ordinary medicine does. So when you get something like cancer, you have a whole series of stages where the networks that specify the cancer become more and more complex and intertwined with one another. And that means by the time you get to the final disease, if you have a really good targeted drug, almost all the time what you're doing is treating the symptom and not treating the whole disease, okay? So how do we go about dealing with the whole disease? Well, in the next click, we actually, in this 5,000 individuals, saw 167 transfer from wellness to disease, and 30 of them did cancer. We looked at 10 that did cancer, and we looked at their bloods prior to the time of diagnosis, and for 10 out of 10 demonstrated, one, there were a whole set of proteins for each that were elevated, and the proteins often mapped into the disease-perturbed networks for that particular cancer. So it told us you had cancer, it was a cancer of this type, and if you can design a therapy, here's where you start to design it, because these are the first things that got perturbed. So in phenomic medicine, on the next click, what we'll be able to do then is do a very early diagnosis of this disease, and we'll be able to use these proteins on the next click to get the early network that we can target the therapy for. And then finally, what that'll do is reverse the disease before it ever becomes clinically manifest. And think of the implications if we can do this with all chronic diseases, and I'm absolutely confident we will be able to in time. That is, 86% of our $4.5 trillion healthcare budget goes to chronic diseases. Suppose we could eliminate in 10 years most of those chronic diseases. We could really save a lot of money that could be useful depending on how the politicians spend it. Yeah.
So I have to tell you, I have gotten so many questions already. People are concerned about the NIH, so are we. Thank you for your concern. So when you just mentioned politics, what's your forecast?
Okay, I'm a determined optimist, and where there is challenge, there is opportunity. So what actually we're doing now is I have two lobbyists in Washington that have taken a big initiative on the Phenome Project, that's continuation of the Genome Project, called the Phenome Initiative. And we've renamed it now, Make America Healthy. And we've taken it to the transition teams in HHS and some of the NIH things, and we've really got a very positive response on that. So my hope is that you can create this as a legacy that certain Republicans would like to have on their resume that may encourage him to support that kind of endeavor. So that's taking the positive attitude. I think with all that's going on, there are two things that are really clear now. One, everything is going to start with an incredible butcher job in a relatively thoughtless way that's going to optimize saving money, okay? And then two, gradually they're going to have to repair all the damage they've done, at least to some extent, and change the organization and do those kind of things. And I think in the short term, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty because they don't even know what they're doing. And in the long term, I think there is the real chance that from this will come good and will come bad, and hopefully the good that goes for research in the future will overwhelm all of the muscle they cut initially when they were trying to get rid of the fat. So I'm at least partially optimistic that some rationality will be introduced into the thing. What is clear is the Republicans are really attracted to very big projects that have meaningful results. And I think that's what Phenome, Mouth, and the Buck can do together, is really emphasize opportunities. And if we get to it, I'll talk about one spectacular opportunity that the two of us have already brought in.
Great.
Okay, so the final conclusion we'll take is, in a sense, there are two types of wellness from your point of view. One is the classical wellness, and you all know about it, and it has to do with exercise and diet and stress and sleep and all of those kind of things, and ordinary clinical chemistries that can warn you that you're have too much hemoglobin A1C or something like that. And the data-driven adds to that enormous dimensionality. Let me say, all of the classic stuff is really important, but we add enormous dimensions as we look at these different data features and we extract these actionable possibilities that I was talking about. And I think between the genome and phenome, we probably have 25,000 actionable possibilities that we're going to be looking at in the future. And we're actually now setting up a company called Phenoma AI, which is going to take 3 really unique phenomic data sets that we have and use those to instruct a transformer on how to be able to then take your genome and phenome and feed back to you in a prioritized list the actionable possibilities that you want to do. Okay? And we'll say a word or two more about that later on.
That's great. So I've gotten a question about the cost of all of this, and is it going to be just for the wealthy, or what's the plan to make it more generally applicable to all of us?
What a terrific question. So right now, I mean, the company that I started called Aerovale went from 2015 to 2019, and it pushed forward this whole vision of data-driven science. We have now 30 published articles that give us different glimpses of scientific wellness now. But it had 2 major failures. One was we didn't have physicians engaged, and we couldn't give disease-related actionable possibilities out without being shut down as 23andMe was. And the second possibility is that most Americans aren't willing to pay much of anything for health. They think it should come from insurance and their companies and all of those kinds of things. So the solution to rich and poor is to democratize phenomics to the point, rather than costing $1,000 a year, we can do it for $5 a year. And one of the ways that we're doing it with a project, again, I'll talk about later, is we're taking interesting wearables like the Oura Ring and the Fitbit or the Apple Watch. They all have enormous numbers of signals that we have no idea what they correlate with. And we're actually using the Oura Ring and a Fitbit-like approach to capture the signals in those wearables and correlate them with the signals in the omics that give us detailed information in the case we're looking at about the pancreas and pancreatic disease and obesity and things like that. So I think the key are this big initiative that I've talked about, because one of the central things it will do is develop the technologies to where we can do with phenomics what we did with genomics. The cost of the first genome was $1 billion. The cost of a genome now is close to $100. So that's 6, 7 orders of magnitude. And with phenomics, we can do 2 or 3 orders. And that democratization is really cool, because not only will it let us deal with the distribution of economic opportunities in the States, we can really think seriously then of going to underdeveloped nations. And because everybody has a cell phone in most of these underdeveloped nations, and that'll be the center for this new kind of omic medicine in the future.
Great.
So where are we going to go next? So let me make a couple of points. We're going to do a whole series of new studies where we take individuals and do genome and phenome analyses, and I'll indicate in a few moments what some of these are. But there are two really important points I would make. One is we're going to generate 10 to 100 times as much data as we did in the first studies. And the more data we generate, the finer view we have of the details of wellness and healthy aging and disease transitions and so forth. So the increased data are going to be really important. And I think the second thing that's really important, and we'll mention it in the next slide, is to study aging, to study brain health, because that's something that is absolutely missing now. And what we should start in brain health with is cognition, okay? Because the key that makes us different from all other creatures is our ability to think and feel. And so cognition can be a lot of different kinds of things. Memory is one example of it. Reaction time is another example of it. Depth of the field is another example. A good friend of mine, Michael Merzenich, started a company called Posit that developed a series of tests called BrainHQ, which digitally analyze whether or not you're deficient in any one of 25 different cognitive features, okay? Point number one. Point number two, he showed that for ordinary people who do nothing unusual, you have maximum cognitive abilities in the late 20s and you decline thereafter. But what he showed that was really spectacular in a series of clinical trials is you could take 80-year-olds that had seriously degraded cognitive abilities and more or less return them to what they were in their mid-30s with the kind of remedies that he made available for the different cognitive features. And one of the, I just learned this about a week ago, one of the really interesting points he made is there's one cognitive feature that is the leader, and if you optimize that cognitive feature, a lot of the others follow along behind, and that's reaction time. And there are really simple ways you can enormously improve your reaction time. So the other thing is the classic kinds of things that are listed here: sleep and stress and exercise and so forth. My own feeling is if you ask me one thing about my health, and I've been pretty healthy most of my life, I think is most important, I would unequivocally say it's exercise. So, for example, this morning I was able to do 190 push-ups in 3 different sets within a 20-minute period. And deep knee bends, but balancing and all of these other kinds of things. And flexibility is really important as you get older. All of these things should be built into the schemes of what you do. And just to give you an idea, my age now is about 15 years, my biological age is 15 years younger than my chronological age. So I have at least 30 more years of productive career before I'll have to retire.
So I want to let you know that in the follow-up email that you're going to get, I will include a link to this website that has these brain training things so that you guys can access it.
That'd be great.
Yes, okay.
And you can go online with Posit and ask for BrainHQ, and it's very easy to do. And if you spend 15 or 20 minutes a day, it'll change your life. I can guarantee you, okay?
Okay, so let's talk about AI.
So AI, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but what is really cool is we being Phenome Health and the book, have 3 large phenomic data sets that no one else has in the world. And what we're planning to do with those data sets is put them into something called a knowledge graph. And what that does for each of the data sets is it ties individual by individual the uniqueness of the individual to the vast world of biological knowledge. So it gives us an enormous amount of relational data that then can be used to train these large language models or transmitters to be able then to take your genome and phenome and give you an ordered list of these kind of things. And we'll probably start with giving it to your physician, and through your physician it will come down to you. But this is, and if, let me just say, I think this is one of 2 or 3 things that are utterly going to transform all of healthcare in the very near future. And I think it's really going to be interesting to see to what extent older doctors can adopt the enormous opportunities that come from HI. It isn't going to replace them. What it's going to do for an ordinary doctor is make him an expert in all fields of medicine so he can treat his patients, her patients, like they've never been treated before. I mean, it's really an exceptional opportunity, but the participatory part is tough. You have to figure out how to persuade them. I will say we're also very interested in digital twins. And what's cool about digital twins is we can take the unique information from each of you and create a virtual twin with regard to features that we might be interested in, like brain health. And then we can make predictions now. If you do activities that relate to exercise, activities that relate to diet, or if you take these pills, which are the best things for you. And I'll tell you, the striking difference is exercise and diet are infinitely better than any of the pills that claim to be able to deal with Alzheimer's. And I'll tell you, we're actually publishing a paper that says Alzheimer's is not a disease of amyloid. Alzheimer's is a disease of metabolism, and one of the really important things exercise gives you is that daily oxygenation of your brain. So you want to do some stressful kinds of things as well.
Okay. So, ongoing projects for Phenome Health. We're going to go to the ARPA-H grant next. So, but give an overview of that and then some of the other things you're doing.
Okay, so the ARPA-H grant was a proposal that Phenome Health and the book took to a new agency called ARPA-H, whose vision is to take on big projects that are related to human health in various ways. And I think we got one of the largest ones. And fortunately, we got it before all of this chaos set in. So for the time being, we're in good shape anyway. It has 5 different points, and I'll come to that in just a moment. But I do want to say we're doing 3 other things that are really important. One, we've just gotten $14 million from South Carolina to start a major observational clinical trial on diabetes. And it will do for diabetes exactly what the 5,000-year, 4-year program did for scientific wellness. That is, at the end of that time, we'll know more about diabetes than we've learned in the entire history of studying the disease easily. And we plan to do that with each of the 4 major chronic diseases. We're well along to bringing Alzheimer's into that same stage, okay? Third thing is we have for the past 4 or 5 years been recruiting a series now of 420 pregnant women. And what we have done with 150 of those is we've looked at 5 different time points in pregnancy and followed them afterwards through with the genome and the phenome kind of analyses and the clinical chemistries. And again, what is really unique about pregnancy, and it makes it different from virtually any other biological system you study, is there's the beginning and there's an end. So in a 9-month period, we have an enormous amount of information, and we're just beginning to analyze the genomic and phenomic information. And again, I think it'll transform our understanding of pregnancy. And then finally, we're working on 2 separate phenome initiatives. One, an international program that's going to be focused in Asia, and the second, the program I mentioned that will be focused here in the United States, Make America Better. And the critical things about these programs are, one, they'll prove the health validation of data-driven science. 2, they will show there'll be enormous cost savings over a 10-year period and a million people analyzed. And 3, will drive the technology to democratize the whole thing. So.
As we go to the next slide, I had a question. Somebody wants to know, can type 2 diabetes be reversed? You talked about that. So type 2 diabetes in the early stage can be reversed. At later stages, if you treat it really well, you can stop it where it is, but you can't necessarily reverse it back. And we've seen this with a number of chronic diseases. And it's the real reason why the solution to chronic diseases is not figuring out therapies. It's figuring out early detection and reversal before it gets to be complicated. So that, I also got another question. It was, somebody had it with a smiley face. It was a little humorous, but do you think you're going to get pushback from, what's it going to mean for pharma and biotech, the companies that develop drugs? That was a question from somebody in the audience.
Okay, it's a wonderful question, because I'm just in the midst of starting a new drug company that I think is absolutely going to transform how you make drugs in the future. And it'll be, in 10 years, a fantastic paradigm change for all of pharma. And the idea is we can make enormous numbers of drugs very rapidly, we can test them rapidly, we can make them very inexpensively, and so it's, I think, really going to be a big paradigm change. So I think pharma will fight that all the way. I mean, I've been involved in a series of paradigm changes, including the Human Genome Project, and for every single one of them, there's been enormous pushback initially and skepticism. I remember we developed automated sequencing, which made the Genome Project possible. Sending my first 2 grants into the NIH, I got the worst priority scores almost I ever gotten. And one of the reviewers said, "This is impossible, it can never be done." And a second reviewer said, "Grad students can do this far less expensively than..." So, and even Jim Watson argued, "Why are you wasting all your time automating sequencing, Lee, when, if you think about it, 1 million Chinese, if they each sequence 3 nucleotides, would do the whole human genome?" And you know, so that was it's the kind of skepticism you meet for every idea that's a true paradigm change. And it's really what makes science fun, because with determined optimism, you can push through all that nonsense. So, of course, Trump is going to challenge us a bit in that regard.
So the fact that Lee's technology enabled us to study the genome is the reason why every year he's on the short list for a Nobel Prize. So, all right. So ARPA-H, where are we going with ARPA-H? That's the big grant we got.
Yeah, so look, there are 5 projects, and I'll just describe. The first one I'll tell you is a fantastic project with 130 people, where what we'd like to do is take blood analyses very frequently for a 2-week period. And what we're interested in are the rhythms of the 3 classes of analytes that occur in the blood: the proteins, the metabolites, and the clinical chemistries. And that knowledge is very important because it tells us when and how we should be drawing blood so we get the most reliable kinds of, but it gives us really deep insights in circadian rhythms. And then we'll gradually, over a period of a year, extend this study. We'll take the samples less frequently, but there we'd like to look for cycles that are yearly rather than cycles that are daily. And the cycles are really important for optimizing our ability to use genome and phenome. And I think what's exciting about that project is the Buck is now recruiting volunteers to come and help us with this project. And if you do it, you're going to be making a major contribution to science just by helping us realize a very important element of phenomics that's never, ever been studied before. So you'll be a unique, it is a unique opportunity to kind of serve the greater good if you have that inclination.
So it's called the TIME Trial, and it is 125 people. We're going to have folks from our clinical research team out in the atrium after this, so if you have questions about TIME or any of our other clinical trials, you will be able to ask them there. One final thing, why is it important for us to know about our biological rhythms? I've read that like it might matter what time of the day you have surgery. I mean, why should we care?
I think the major reason why we should care is because it's an area where we have zero knowledge now. And you know, there are fundamental daily cycles and probably intermittent cycles and seasonal cycles, and understanding the nature of those is going to give us really deep insights in how you sample individuals so you can optimize and correct. I mean, if with these cycles we took samples from people at different times in the cycle, the variation wouldn't have anything to do with differences except the cycle. And we want to actually look at differences between sick people and well people. So without that knowledge, we can't do it effectively.
Anything else you want to talk about these upcoming ARPA-H projects?
Let me just say, I think we go into enormous detail with the other 4 projects, but the last of the projects is the one that's the ultimate project that really excites me. And that's the idea, together with the AI tools that I talked about earlier, we'll be able to take your genome and your phenome, and we'll be able to study you with N of 1 medicine. We're not taking a big population and averaging it, and we're treating you as we would treat that average. We're treating you as you should be treated in the context of your genome and your phenome at that point in time. So N of 1 medicine is going to be an enormous paradigm change, which, given the tools we'll generate for the physicians, will make it wonderful. And with this new drug company that I talked about, what is a really cool idea is we'll give you your drugs in that same way. We'll take your N of 1 data and the drug possibilities that we can generate, and for you, we'll make drugs that can be done in the context of your genome and your phenome. So anyway,
that's great. So
that's what excites me.
Perfect lead into a question from the audience. Speak about statins and why you think they are only effective for a small number of people.
You know, statins are only effective for a small number of people. In fact, there was a study of the 10 most popular drugs in the US about, gosh, it's 8 or 10 years ago now, where what they showed was really staggering. The 8 or 10 most popular drugs ranged from 1 in 4 it was effective to 1 in 25 it was effective, and the effective ones across the whole 10 were less than 10%. Okay, so why aren't they effective? It is because of the enormous genome and phenome heterogeneity in individuals, and that's exactly why with N of 1 medicine we can say this set of drugs is going to work perfectly on you, and we'll be able to assure you that. I mean, one of the other cool things about this company I'm starting is we have the ability to infinitely modify these drugs so we can select very carefully the positive results and avoid the negative results. And that's something that pharma can't do at all today. I mean, in fact, the targeted antibodies are really generally personal disasters because of side effects for the people that go through them and everything. But anyway, that's the answer. So this might be the most important slide I'm going to show you. Click one more time. In 2000, I started thinking about what healthcare ought to be in the future. And eventually we came up with the idea it should be 4 Ps: predictive, preventive, personalized, and participatory. And the first 3 Ps, predictive, preventive, and personalized, are 1, all science, and 2, they're exactly what we invented data-driven health to do, because it really maps into those 3 Ps absolutely beautifully, okay? But the 4th P, if we could have one more click, is much more complicated, and that's the simple idea. If we're going to have this revolution in medicine, N of 1 kind of medicine, how are we going to persuade patients, physicians, healthcare leaders, pharma, big tech, regulatory, politicians? How do we persuade these people away from a disease orientation of healthcare and so forth? And I think the critical feature are these million-person projects will give us hard data to show it's not only health effective, it's cost effective, and it's going to be simple and extend it to the world. So those are, now the question is, there are 2 things that each person has to be able to do. You're the captain of your health trajectory. So 1, you've got to educate yourself as to what the options are that you have. And then 2, you have to have the will to follow them through. And how we do that is an enormous educational challenge. And one of the reasons I wrote the book, just so people could start thinking about those kinds of things.
So I've gotten questions about health coaches. It seems like at some point people might need some nudging and help keeping on track.
The interesting thing we learned from Airvale is that a really good health coach could deal with 1,000 individuals, okay? So let's say that we have 100 million. Tell me how many health coaches you need. It doesn't scale, right? So what we're going to do is the chatbots that I talked about earlier. We're going to teach the chatbots to, and you know what I'd like to see, one other thing I'll really emphasize, data-driven health should be done as a family and not as an individual. Because if you do it as a family, you gain much deeper insights into each of the individuals in the family than if you do it alone. And if we do that, we could then train a chatbot to deal with the context of the family and be able to answer the questions. And you could program the the chatbot to be a reminding mother who says, you haven't done your exercise for 2 days now. So,
Or no more pizza for lunch for a few days, yes. Okay.
Okay, so this is the last final grand slide, and it's kind of what I said at the very beginning. Phenomics is all about using systems biology to look at the body, and right now we're looking at blood as a window into health and disease. And from that, and measuring these various analytes, we have gained, as you've heard in the course of this lecture, enormously deep knowledge. And we did it in a hypothesis-free approach and a big data approach and a discovery approach. We're just looking to see what we learn. Now, geroscience, which is the essence of what the buck is all about, is a beautiful contrast to that, because they're focused on the 12 or 14 hallmarks of aging, and they're focused down in a hypothesis-driven manner on how do these things actually work. And what is interesting is the big data approach of scientific wellness has now created enormous families of interacting elements of all the different data features. So the genome, the various phenome aspects, the digital aspects, the gut micro, we can actually look at the interrelationships of all of those in these large families. And now we can take those families that have all those relationships, and we can begin one at a time mapping them into the fine details of how you go about aging. So the buck and Phenome Health are uniquely positioned to do an integration on the last click that is actually going to make it possible to optimize health span, and in the short term, give us health spans of 90 and beyond. And in the longer term, it's going to be interesting how far we can push it.
So my last question for you, Lee, is I get questions, and I got questions about people taking supplements. Based on what you've said about drugs and do they work or do they not work, what is your recommended approach? So somebody says, we're taking NMN, we're taking NAD+, metformin, resveratrol. There's so many supplements out there that purport and probably do help with some of those aging hallmarks. How should we approach them?
Well, I think that the rigorous way to approach them is to set up clinical trials where you compare, and the buck is doing that in a number of different ways, and we'll be setting up probably some clinical trials with things like Alzheimer's, where we compare behavioral modifications, and BrainHQ and Alzheimer's really has had some interesting effects too. So, anyway, I think that's. I think there's a lot we can do. If you sit down and talk to one of these large language models and say, give me all of the supplements that might be useful in dealing with aging and or chronic diseases and so forth, you get an enormous list of things. And, I would say probably a small handful are becoming more validated. And some of the validated ones don't have good clinical trials yet. So the question is, do you want to take a shot on rapamycin? Has some utterly marvelous qualities. And the cool thing about aging is that some of the phenomena in the simple round worm or even yeast are preserved all the way up to human beings. So it's enormously conserved, so we can be a little more confident about aging insights from model organisms, but it's different from having them be tested. But if you're venturesome, you can take some things that may not have clinical validation. And I would say for the most part of the things that are being considered, they're pretty safe. So all it does is cost you money, okay?
So I want to thank you, Lee, for being here. Honestly, you are a mood. Who here has had their mood boosted because of this seminar? All right, yay, okay. All right, so here's what's going to happen next. You're going to get the email. I will send you links. This is the time when I usually pitch the next seminar. This is our last seminar. I got a question, are these seminars going to continue? We plan on continuing them. I have a meeting coming up soon where we're putting the next series together, so stay tuned for that. You don't, even though our seminar series has ended, you don't have to wait that long to come back in the Drexler. In April, you are invited to the Levy Seminar Series. Nathan Price, who's now a professor here, who co-authored that book with Lee, is going to be talking about it. I will include a link to register for that seminar in the email that you're going to get. We talked about clinical trials. We talked about the time trial. We have clinical trials happening here at the Buck. So once again, out in the atrium, there'll be folks for you to talk to. There's a QR code you can take if you want to look at things when you're at home. Very exciting stuff. Please get involved. I would be remiss if I did not make a fundraising pitch, especially in this time of uncertainty. Honestly, one woman came up to me beforehand and said, who should I make the check out to? Because she wants to support us. Believe me, the community support means so much to the morale here at the Buck. So if you've ever considered getting involved, now is the time to do it. And before we go, let me encourage you to take a look at, we have a great online learning course. If you'd like to learn more about the biology of aging, we have great reviews, so check it out. And also we have a very popular podcast called We're Not Getting Any Younger Yet. And we interview researchers on aging from all across the country, and you get some good information from that. If you have not been on a tour, please come on a tour. You can sign up on our websites. They happen on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. If you haven't been on a tour in a long time, come again. We have a very cool museum exhibit that talks about the history of the Buck and also sort of the history of research itself. And please keep up with us. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're looking at maybe X, I'm not sure what we're going to do with that one, but there are ways to keep in touch with us, and you can sign up for our newsletter on our website. That's actually the best way to keep in touch with everything that's happening here. So I just want to thank you so much for coming. Thanks to our sponsors. I love doing this. Stay tuned. You're going to get notification. We're going to do it again. Have a great day, everybody.